Elena Voss stood motionless in the dim glow of her Tribeca loft, the city's hum a distant murmur beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her fingers tightened around the stem of a wine glass, the Cabernet trembling ever so slightly as she stared at the phone on the marble counter. Marcus's phone. It had buzzed an hour ago while he showered, and curiosity, damnable, gnawing curiosity, had driven her to look. Meet me at the with. Room 412. Wear the red dress. The text was from Lila. Her Lila. Her baby sister, who'd once clung to her after nightmares, who'd borrowed her lipstick and laughed at her terrible cooking. Elena's breath hitched, a sharp, jagged thing, as she scrolled further. Photos. Words. A timeline of betrayal stretching back months. Marcus's hands on Lila's skin, their bodies pressed together in grainy hotel selfies. The cruelty of them, sank into her like a blade. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she set the glass down, the clink echoing in the sterile silence, and walked to the bathroom door. Steam curled out as Marcus emerged, towel slung low, his grin faltering when he saw her eyes. You okay, babe? He asked, all charm and feigned concern. Perfect, she said, her voice a velvet razor. Just tired. He didn't notice the lie. He never did. That night, Elena lay beside him, his snores a steady rhythm, and let the plan take root. Revenge wasn't enough, it had to be art. She'd paint their ruin in strokes of cruelty, each move deliberate, each wound deep. By morning, she'd mapped it out. Marcus's ego was his empire, Lila's weakness was her vanity. She'd dismantle them both, piece by jagged piece. The first step was subtle. At breakfast, she slipped a burner phone into Marcus's briefcase, preloaded with messages to a non-existent mistress, someone new, someone not Lila. Let him sweat. Let Lila wonder. Then, she called her gallery assistant, instructing him to misplace a $2 million deal Marcus had brokered through her contacts. A crack in his world, small but spreading. Lila got her own gift that afternoon. Elena met her for coffee, all smiles, and handed her a sleek black box. A little something I found, she said, watching Lila's eyes light up. Inside was a mirror, antique, ornate, its glass subtly warped to distort her reflection into something grotesque. Lila laughed, uneasy, but kept it. Elena knew she'd stare at it later, her confidence fraying. By evening, Marcus raged about the lost deal, pacing the loft, while Lila texted Elena a hesitant "You sure this mirror's not cursed?" Elena sipped her wine, replying with a heart emoji, and smiled into the dark. This was only the beginning. She'd carve their betrayal into something eternal, something that bled. Elena Voss had always believed in symmetry, art demanded it, life too. So when she found Marcus's phone buzzing with Lila's filth, she didn't scream or weep. She planned. 3 months later, her masterpiece was ready, and the gallery she owned in Tribeca would be its stage. The discovery had been a quiet violence. That night, Marcus showered off his lies while Elena scrolled through texts and photos, Lila in a red dress, Marcus grinning like a wolf. Her sister. Her husband. The betrayal wasn't just a wound, it was a canvas. She'd paint it red. She started small. A burner phone slipped into Marcus's briefcase, seeded with fake messages from a phantom lover. He found it 2 days later, his face paling as he stammered excuses to an unbothered Elena. She smiled, pouring him coffee. You look stressed, darling. Meanwhile, she tanked a $2 million deal he'd brokered through her gallery contacts, watching his hedge fund cronies turn on him like sharks scenting blood. Lila got her own torment. Elena gifted her an antique mirror, its glass warped to twist her reflection, cheekbones too sharp, eyes too hollow. It's unique, like you, Elena said, her voice honeyed. Lila laughed, but Elena knew she'd stare at it, her vanity curdling into doubt. Soon, Lila's texts grew anxious. Do I look different to you? Elena replied with a heart emoji, savoring the rot she'd planted. The cruelty escalated. Elena hired a thug to stage a hit-and-run on Marcus's prized Bentley, nothing fatal, just enough to shatter his knee. He limped home, cursing, while she nursed him with pills and pity, slipping sedatives into his scotch. Lila's turn came next. Elena leaked doctored photos to her modeling agency, Lila snorting lines at a party that never happened. Bookings dried up overnight. Lila called, sobbing, "Someone's ruining me." Elena cooed, "We'll figure it out, sis," and hung up, smiling. Intrigue thickened the air. Marcus, paranoid, hired a PI to tail his other mistress, only to find nothing. His temper frayed, he shouted at Elena, who took it with eerie calm. Lila, meanwhile, grew jumpy, claiming she saw shadows outside her apartment. Detective Sam Carver entered the scene when Marcus reported the car accident, his gruff voice probing Elena's too-perfect alibi. She fed him half-truths, her poise unshaken. The finale arrived on a frigid March night, March 24, 2025, to be exact. Elena invited them to her gallery for a private showing. Marcus hobbled in, leaning on a cane, his eyes bloodshot. Lila followed, gaunt and jittery, clutching the warped mirror like a talisman. The space was dark, save for a spotlight on a massive canvas draped in black cloth. "Welcome," Elena said, her voice a blade wrapped in silk. She locked the doors with a remote click, and Marcus frowned. "What's this about?" Lila's gaze darted, sensing the trap. Elena unveiled the painting. It was them, Marcus and Lila, naked, entwined, their faces twisted in agony, painted in slashes of crimson and black. Real blood streaked the canvas, sourced from a butcher, its copper tang filling the air. Lila gasped. Marcus swore. "You're sick," he spat. "No," Elena said. "You are." She pressed a button, and steel cables dropped from the ceiling, looping around their wrists, rigged pulleys she'd installed weeks ago. They jerked upward, dangling like marionettes, Marcus's bad leg twisting grotesquely. Lila shrieked, kicking air. Elena circled them, a sculptor with her clay. "You fucked each other," she said, "so I'll fuck you both." From a table, she lifted a scalpel, its edge glinting. Marcus thrashed, his bravado gone. "Elena, please." She sliced first into his good leg, a shallow cut, precise, blood welling like ink. He held. Lila begged, I'm sorry." Elena turned, her eyes cold. "You're not." She dragged the blade across Lila's cheek, mirroring the warped reflection she'd forced her to see. Blood dripped onto the polished floor, pooling with Marcus's. Detective Carver's voice crackled outside, someone had tipped him off, but Elena didn't rush. She'd planned for this. She dropped the scalpel, unlocked the doors, and stepped back as Carver burst in, gun drawn. Marcus and Lila hung, whimpering, alive but broken. The painting loomed behind them, a grotesque monument. "She's insane," Marcus rasped. Carver cuffed Elena, his jaw tight, but her smile didn't waver. "Check the basement," she said calmly. He did, later, finding Marcus's burner phone, Lila's forged photos, and a forged confession, Marcus admitting to the hit and run, Lila to blackmail. Planted, all of it, but airtight. In court, Elena played the victim, abused, betrayed, driven to a breakdown. The jury bought it. Marcus and Lila got prison, she got probation. Released, Elena reopened her gallery, the blood-streaked painting now a legend. Critics called it genius. She called it justice. Late at night, alone, she'd pour wine and stare at it, the crimson still vivid. Symmetry achieved. Cruelty satisfied. And somewhere, in their cells, Marcus and Lila would feel her victory, sharp, unending, and theirs to choke on. Elena Voss didn't scream when she found the texts. She didn't shatter the wine glass trembling in her hand or claw at Marcus's face as he showered off Lila's perfume. She stood in their Tribeca loft, the city's neon glow bleeding through the windows, and let the betrayal fester. March 24, 2025, was still months away, but that night, October 12, 2024, she began to sculpt her revenge. It would be slow, festering, and blacker than the void. The evidence was a gut punch, Marcus's phone, buzzing with Lila's filth. With hotel, room 412. Red dress. Miss you already. Photos followed, Lila's pale thighs wrapped around Marcus's waist, his teeth bared in a grin Elena once thought was hers. Her sister, 28 and radiant, and her husband, 40 and predatory, had been carving her out of their lives for 6 months. She scrolled until her eyes burned, memorizing every frame, every lie. Then she set the phone down and waited, her breath a slow hiss in the dark. Marcus emerged, towel low, oblivious. You okay, babe? His voice was syrup, slick with deceit. Fine, she said, her smile a shard of glass. Just tired. He didn't see the abyss opening behind her eyes. The rot begins. Elena's revenge wasn't impulsive, it was a plague, deliberate and creeping. She started with Marcus's ego, his hedge fund throne. A burner phone went into his briefcase, loaded with texts from Clara, a ghost lover, begging for his touch. He found it at work, his face blanching as he scrolled, then stormed home, shouting, "Who the fuck is Clara?" Elena shrugged, stirring soup laced with a bitter herb, just enough to sour his stomach for days. Maybe you should check your conscience, she said, watching him gag. Next, she gutted his empire. She'd brokered a $2 million deal through her gallery contacts. Now she lost it, forging emails to make it look like Marcus botched the numbers. His partners turned feral, clawing at his reputation. He came home reeking of whiskey, his suit wrinkled, and she offered him scotch, spiked with sedatives. He slept, twitching, while she whispered into the dark, "You'll feel this soon." Lila's unraveling was subtler, more rancid. Elena met her for coffee, handing over the warped mirror, its glass now etched with faint, hairline cracks, like spider veins. Found it in the gallery basement, she lied, her voice a caress. Lila's reflection twisted, her nose hooked, her lips shriveled. She laughed, uneasy, but took it home. Days later, she texted, "I look wrong. What's happening to me?" Elena replied, "You're beautiful, sis," and pictured her staring, picking at her face until it bled. The torment grew teeth. Marcus's Bentley met its end on a rain-slick street, a hired thug in a stolen truck, aiming for his legs. The crunch of metal and bone echoed as Marcus screamed, pinned under the wreckage. He crawled home, knee shattered, femur jutting through skin like a broken branch. Elena bandaged him, her touch clinical, slipping crushed painkillers into his tea, enough to dull the pain but keep him awake, trapped in a fog of half-dreams where faceless women laughed. Lila's ruin was slower, wetter. Elena doctored photos, Lila snorting coke, her eyes glassy, and sent them to her agency. Bookings vanished. Then came the package, a dead rat, its belly slit, stuffed with a lock of Lila's own hair, snipped from her pillow while she slept. Lila called, voice cracking, "Someone's in my apartment. There's blood." Elena soothed her, "It's probably a prank," knowing Lila would scrub the stains until her hands peeled raw. Marcus's paranoia bloomed like mold. He hired a PI to find Clara, but the trail led nowhere. Elena had burned the burner phone in a dumpster, its plastic melting into a blackened lump. He raged, smashing a lamp, glass shards embedding in his palm. She cleaned the wound with salt water, smiling as he hissed. Lila, meanwhile, saw shadows, Elena's doing, a silhouette in a hooded coat lingering outside her window, vanishing when she blinked. Detective Sam Carver sniffed around after the hit and run, his boots scuffing her gallery floor. "Your husband's got enemies," he growled, eyeing her two steady hands. She fed him scraps, Marcus's temper, his affairs, and watched him chew on them, suspicious but toothless. March 24, 2025, arrived, cold and sharp. Elena invited them to her gallery, her voice velvet over the phone, a private showing. "For us." Marcus limped in, cane tapping, his face a map of sleepless nights, eyes sunken, skin sallow from weeks of tainted food. Lila followed, a ghost of herself, cheeks hollow, a fresh scab on her jaw where she'd clawed at her reflection. The warped mirror hung from her neck on a chain, a noose she couldn't shed. The gallery was a tomb, lights off, air thick with the tang of rust. A spotlight hit a draped canvas, 8 feet tall. "Welcome," Elena said, locking the doors with a remote. Marcus snarled, "What the hell's this?" Lila's breath hitched, her fingers twitching. Elena ripped the cloth away. The painting was a nightmare. Marcus and Lila, nude, their flesh flayed in crimson strokes, real blood mixed into the paint, sourced from a slaughterhouse drain. Their painted eyes wept red, mouths gaped in silent screams. A jar of teeth, pig's teeth, jagged and yellow, sat at the base, labeled yours. Lila retched. Marcus lunged, cane slipping, and fell hard. "Crazy bitch!" he roared. Elena pressed a button. Steel cables dropped, snaring their wrists, rigged from the rafters, rusted and barbed. They yanked upward, Marcus's bad leg snapping audibly, bone-piercing flesh anew. Lila dangled, her scabbed face splitting as she thrashed, blood trickling into her mouth. Elena stepped closer, scalpel in hand, its blade crusted with old stains. "You fucked each other," she said, "so I'll carve you to match." She sliced Marcus's chest, a shallow grid, blood oozing like sap. His screams were wet, guttural. Lila sobbed, "Please, I'll do anything." Elena turned, slashing her thigh, deep, deliberate, muscle parting like wet clay. Lila's wail was a banshee's cry, blood pooling black on the floor. Carver's voice barked outside, "Police! Open up!" But Elena had time. She dropped the scalpel, smeared her hands with their blood, and unlocked the doors. Carver stormed in, gun raised, freezing at the tableau, Marcus and Lila, suspended, dripping, the painting a grotesque altar. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, cuffing Elena as she smiled, serene. The basement held her salvation, the burner phone, Lila's forged photos, a typed confession from Marcus, hit and run, blackmail, all lies she'd planted. In court, Elena wept crocodile tears, abused wife, broken sister, pushed to madness. The jury swallowed it. Marcus got 20 years, his leg amputated from infection. Lila got 15, her face scarred, her mind frayed, she scratched at it still, whispering about mirrors. Elena walked free, probation light as ash. The gallery thrived, the bloodied painting a macabre draw, rumor said it wept at night. She'd sit before it, wine in hand, the air heavy with decay. Marcus rotted in a cell, his stump oozing. Lila screamed in hers, clawing at shadows. And Elena, untouchable, breathed their ruin, dark, wet, and hers forever. Elena Voss didn't flinch when she found the texts. October 12, 2024, was a night like any other in their Tribeca loft, Marcus showering, the city's pulse seeping through the glass walls, until his phone buzzed on the counter. She'd always trusted him, or so she told herself, but boredom flicked her thumb across the screen. With hotel, room 412. Red dress. Miss you already. Lila's name glowed above it, a dagger in the dark. Elena scrolled, her pulse a slow drum. Photos loaded, Marcus's hands gripping Lila's hips, her sister's red lips parted in a gasp, their bodies tangled in a hotel bed's crumpled sheets. 6 months of filth, time-stamped, a gallery of betrayal. Her wine glass trembled, the Cabernet sloshing like blood, but she didn't break it. She set it down, the clink a gunshot in the silence, and waited. Marcus emerged, towel slung low, his hair dripping. "You okay, babe?" His grin was a predator's, all teeth and charm. "Fine," she said, her voice a thread of silk stretched taut. "Just tired." He didn't see the shift, didn't feel the air thicken with her hate. That night, she lay beside him, his snores a wet rasp, and let the plan root. Revenge wasn't enough, it had to be a disease, spreading slow and black. She'd strip Marcus of his empire, Lila of her light, and leave them choking on their own rot. By dawn, she'd mapped it, his pride, her vanity, twin veins to bleed dry. She started with whispers. A burner phone, cheap and scratched, slipped into his briefcase, texts from Clara, a phantom mistress begging for his sweat, his lies. He found it at his office, his roar echoing down the phone later. Who the fuck is Clara, Elena? She stirred soup, bitter wormwood crushed into the broth, and shrugged. Maybe you've been busy. He ate, gagging on the taste, his guts twisting for days. She watched him sweat, pale and hunched, and smiled into her coffee. Lila's turn came at a cafe, the air crisp with autumn rot. Elena handed her the mirror, antique, its glass spiderwebbed with cracks, warping her reflection into a hag's lair. Found it in the gallery basement, she said, her tone a caress. Lila's eyes flickered, her nose bent, her skin sagged in the glass. She laughed, brittle, but took it. That night, she texted, "Do I look sick?" Elena replied, "You're perfect, sis," knowing she'd stare until her nails drew blood. Marcus's empire cracked next. Elena had brokered a $2 million deal through her gallery contacts, a favor he'd begged for. She sabotaged it, forging emails to pin the loss on him. His partners turned, their voices sharp over the phone as he paced the loft, reeking of whiskey and fear. She poured him scotch, sedatives dissolving in the amber, and watched him slump, twitching, his dreams a maze of faceless women clawing at his throat. The cruelty sharpened. Marcus's Bentley met its end on a rain-soaked street, a thug in a stolen truck, paid in cash, aiming for his legs. The crash was a symphony, metal shrieking, glass exploding, Marcus's femur snapping like wet wood. He dragged himself home, blood soaking his trousers, the bone's jagged end glinting through torn flesh. "Some bastard hit me," he rasped, collapsing on the rug. Elena knelt, her hand steady, wrapping the wound with gauze soaked in vinegar, enough to sting, not heal. She crushed painkillers into his tea, too little to numb, too much to let him rest. He moaned, trapped in a haze, his leg a pulsing ruin. Lila's descent was wetter, fouler. Elena doctored photos, Lila snorting coke, her pupils blown wide, and emailed them to her agency from a burner laptop. Bookings evaporated. Then, a package, a dead rat, its belly slit open, intestines spilling like wet ribbons, a lock of Lila's hair, snipped from her pillow, tucked inside. Lila called, voice a sob, "There's blood on my floor. Someone's watching me." Elena cooed, "It's just a sick joke," picturing her scrubbing the tiles until her knuckles split, the rat stink clinging to her skin. Marcus's paranoia festered. He hired a PI to chase Clara, but Elena had melted the burner phone in a dumpster, its plastic a charred puddle. The PI found nothing, and Marcus smashed a lamp in rage, glass embedding in his palm like teeth. She cleaned it with salt water, her fingers lingering as he hissed, blood welling anew. His leg swelled, the skin mottling purple, a sour stench seeping from the bandages. "You're not helping," he snarled. She smiled, "I'm trying, love," and swapped his pills for sugar, letting the pain gnaw deeper. Lila saw shadows, Elena's work, a figure in a hooded coat lurking outside her window, gloved hands smearing pig's blood on the glass. She'd wake to streaks of it, screaming, scrubbing with bleach until her lungs burned. Her texts grew frantic, "I hear breathing at night." Elena replied, "Get some rest," and mailed her a sleep aid, laced with a hallucinogen. Lila's calls turned incoherent, "The mirror's moving, it's eating me." Elena listened, sipping wine, as her sister's mind unraveled. Detective Sam Carver entered the frame after the hit and run, his boots heavy on her gallery floor. "Your husband's pissed someone off," he said, his eyes narrow, tracing her two calm hands. She fed him lies, Marcus's temper, his women, and offered coffee, her smile a mask. He left, suspicious, but she'd already buried the thug's payment in a gallery safe, the truck torched in a Jersey scrapyard. The gallery became her crucible. She spent nights there, welding steel cables into the rafters, rusted, barbed, a trap waiting to bite. She mixed paint with slaughterhouse blood, the stench gagging her assistants, who quit one by one. The canvas grew, 8 feet of crimson and black, Marcus and Lila's forms taking shape, flayed, eyeless, their mouths gaping. She added pig's teeth to a jar, their roots yellowed and cracked, and labeled it yours. It was art. It was plague. March 24, 2025, dawned cold, the sky abruze over New York. Elena invited them to the gallery, her voice a siren's call, a private showing. For family. Marcus limped in, cane tapping, his face a ruin, eyes sunken into shadowed pits, skin sallow from months of tainted food, his leg a festering stump barely held by bandages. Lila followed, a wraith, her cheeks gaunt, a scabbed gash on her jaw where she'd clawed at her warped reflection. The mirror hung from her neck, its chain cutting into her throat, a noose she couldn't shed. The gallery was a crypt, lights dead, air thick with rust and rot. A spotlight stabbed a draped canvas, its edges stained dark. Welcome, Elena said, locking the doors with a remote click. Marcus growled, what's this shit? Lila's breath rattled, her fingers twitching like a dying bird's. Elena tore the cloth away. The painting loomed, Marcus and Lila, naked, their flesh peeled back in crimson slashes, blood mixed into the paint, clotting in thick, wet streaks. Their eyeless sockets wept red, mouths stretched in silent howls, pig's teeth glued to the canvas like offerings. The jar sat below, its contents rattling faintly. Lila gagged, while splattering her shoes. Marcus lunged, cane slipping, and crashed to his knees, blood seeping from his leg. You're fucking insane! He roared. Elena pressed a button. Cables dropped, rusted, barbed, snaring their wrists, yanking them upward. Marcus's leg snapped again, bone-piercing flesh like a spear, a wet pop echoing as he screamed. Lila dangled, her scabbed face splitting, blood dripping into her mouth, her thrashing tangling the mirror's chain tighter. Elena circled, scalpel in hand, its blade crusted with old meat. You fucked each other, she said, her voice a low hymn, so I'll carve you to fit. She sliced Marcus's chest, a grid of shallow cuts, blood oozing like tar, his screams choking on phlegm. She turned to Lila, dragging the blade across her thigh, deep, slow, muscle parting, fat glistening yellow before red flooded it. Lila's wail was a shredded thing, her leg twitching as blood pooled, black and stinking. She didn't stop. Marcus's arm next, a long gash, tendon snapping like a cut string, his hand flopping useless. Lila's stomach, a shallow arc, skin peeling back, a thin scream as her insides pulsed. They hung, dripping, the floor a slick mirror of their ruin. Elena stepped back, smeared their blood on her face, a war paint grin, and dropped the scalpel as Carver's voice barked outside, police! Open the damn door! She'd planned this. She unlocked the doors, hands raised, as Carver burst in, gun trembling. Jesus fucking Christ, he whispered, staring at Marcus and Lila, suspended, moaning, the painting a grotesque god. He cuffed Elena, her calm unshaken. Basement, she said, soft as a lover. He searched later, finding the burner phone, Lila's forged photos, Marcus's confession, hit and run, blackmail, all lies she'd buried like bones. The trial was a theater of shadows. Elena wept, abused wife, shattered sister, driven to a breakdown by their cruelty. The jury devoured it, their eyes wet. Marcus got 25 years, his leg amputated after infection ate to the bone, his cell reeking of pus and despair. Lila got 20, her face a scarred mask, her mind gone, she scratched at it, muttering about mirrors eating her soul. Elena walked free, probation a featherlight chain. The gallery thrived, the bloodied painting a legend. Critics called it genius, rumors said it wept at night, the blood never fully drying. Elena sat before it, wine in hand, the air heavy with decay, rust, meat, regret. She'd added details post-trial, a lock of Lila's hair, matted with prison grime, glued to the canvas a shard of Marcus's cane, splintered and stained, nailed to the frame. It was hers now, eternal. Marcus rotted in his cell, his stump oozing, his dreams a loop of cables and blades. Lila screamed in hers, clawing at shadows, her fingers bloody stubs. Elena breathed their ruin, dark, wet, and absolute. She'd visit their ghosts in the painting, tracing the crimson with her fingers, the symmetry perfect. One night, Carver came, off duty, his face haggard. "You got away with it," he said, voice gravel. She offered him wine, her smile a knife. "Did I?" He left, silent, but she knew he'd dream of the gallery, the blood, the teeth. Everyone did. And Elena, untouchable, sipped her victory, sharp, unending, a stain no one could scrub clean.